I still remember the exact second his expression changed, the moment his confidence slipped, just for a fraction of a second, like something inside him cracked and he didn't know how to fix it. It happened so fast most people probably wouldn't have noticed, but I did. Because for an entire week, this man had been waiting for me to leave. Watching me, testing me, pushing me, little by little, hoping I'd break, hoping I'd quit, hoping I'd remove myself so he wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. And the truth is, I almost did. I was this close to giving him exactly what he wanted. But then I saw that look on his face when I mentioned leaving, that excitement he couldn't even hide, and something inside me shifted in a way I didn't expect. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about me being uncomfortable anymore, this became about something deeper. Respect, pride, and the quiet refusal to let someone else decide where I belong. If you've ever been in a situation where someone clearly wants you gone, even though you've done nothing wrong, then you already know how heavy that feels. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, like a constant pressure sitting on your chest, reminding you that no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough for them. And over time, that pressure turns into something else, a mix of frustration, self-doubt, and this burning need to prove that you're not the problem. So if you've ever felt that, or if you've ever wanted to see someone regret underestimating you, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, and just listen closely, because this story isn't about revenge in the way you expect. It's quieter than that, but somehow, way more satisfying. So let me take you back to where this all started. I'm in the military, and if you've never experienced it, it's hard to fully explain what that environment does to you. Everything is structured, controlled, and intense. There's no real personal space, no time to process things properly, no escape from the people around you. You wake up together, train together, eat together, and most importantly, you live together. 5 days a week, same room, same routines, same faces. And during this specific phase of training, I was assigned to a small group of 10 people. Just 10. Which might not sound like a lot, but when you're around the same 9 people constantly, every personality, every attitude, every little tension becomes impossible to ignore. And I was the only woman. Now, I want you to actually sit with that for a moment. Because being the only woman in a group like that isn't just about standing out. It's about constantly feeling like you're being watched, evaluated, judged in ways that the others aren't. It's about knowing that anything you do, good or bad, gets magnified. If you perform well, it's surprising. If you make a mistake, it's expected. And even if no one says it out loud, you can feel it in the air, that quiet question of whether you really belong there or not. At first, I told myself I didn't care. I kept my head down, focused on my work, stayed professional, stayed polite. I wasn't there to make friends, I was there to get through the training and move on. And for the most part, the group dynamic was manageable. Some of the guys were neutral, a couple were actually decent, kept things respectful, didn't treat me any differently. But then, there was him. From the very beginning, something about me seemed to bother him. And I don't mean in a subtle way. I mean in that uncomfortable, hard-to-ignore way where you can feel someone's negativity before they even say a word. The way he looked at me wasn't neutral. It wasn't even just cold. It was like he had already decided something about me, like I had already failed in his eyes before I even got a chance to prove anything. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he's just like that with everyone. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But then the small things started happening. Little comments under his breath that weren't meant to start a confrontation, but were definitely meant to be heard. She's too slow. She doesn't get it. Why is she even here? And every single time, I heard him. Every word. Every tone. But I didn't react. I couldn't. Because reacting in that environment, especially as the only woman, comes with consequences. You're not seen as standing up for yourself. You're seen as emotional, difficult, a problem. So I stayed calm. I answered politely. I kept my voice steady even when I could feel that tightness in my chest, that urge to snap back, to defend myself, to ask him what his problem actually was. But I didn't. I swallowed it. Over and over again. And the thing about swallowing things like that is that they don't disappear. They build. As the days went on, he got bolder. The quiet comments turned into direct criticism. No hesitation, no filter. He would question my work in front of everyone, challenge me even when I knew I was right, and speak in that tone, the one that makes it clear he doesn't respect you, doesn't take you seriously, doesn't think you belong. And the craziest part? We had only been working together for a week. 1 week was enough for him to decide who I was, what I was capable of, and where I should be, which, in his mind, was clearly somewhere else. And I kept asking myself the same question again and again: what did I do to deserve this? Because I wasn't slacking. If anything, I was putting in more effort than most of them, precisely because I knew I had to prove myself. I double-checked everything. I paid attention. I stayed focused. I showed up ready to work every single day. And still, to him, none of it mattered. It didn't feel like he was reacting to my performance. It felt like he had already made up his mind about me before I even opened my mouth. And deep down, I knew why. I was the only woman in that room. And whether people like to admit it or not, there are still environments where that alone is enough for someone to judge you, to question you, to resent your presence without even knowing you. And I could feel that energy from him constantly. It wasn't just dislike, it felt like he genuinely believed I didn't deserve to be there. And that realization does something to you, because now it's not just about doing your job anymore. It's about constantly proving that you deserve basic respect. It's about carrying this invisible weight where every move you make feels like it has to be perfect, because any mistake will just confirm what they already believe about you. And I was getting tired. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. Waking up every day knowing I'd have to walk into that room again, see his face again, hear his tone again, it started to drain me in a way I didn't expect. And the thing is, this wasn't permanent. This training setup only lasted 2 months. After that, we'd all go our separate ways. Which meant, I had an option. I could leave. I could request to switch groups. Start fresh somewhere else. Remove myself from that environment completely. And honestly, that option started to feel more and more appealing the longer I stayed. So one day, I mentioned it. Not dramatically. Not as a big announcement. Just casually, like I was thinking out loud. I said I might try to change groups. And the reaction I got, that's when everything changed. Because the second those words left my mouth, his entire demeanor shifted. His face lit up in a way that was almost impossible to ignore. There was no attempt to hide it, no effort to stay neutral. It was pure excitement. Genuine, visible relief. Like something he'd been waiting for had finally started happening. And then the questions started. Did you talk to them yet? When are you leaving? Have you signed the request? Did they approve it? Not once. Not twice. Multiple times a day. Every single day after that. It was like he couldn't let it go, like my potential departure had become the most important thing on his mind. And the more he asked, the more obvious it became. He didn't just dislike me. He wanted me gone. And for a brief moment, I almost gave him exactly what he wanted. I thought about how much easier things would be if I just left, if I removed myself from the situation and stopped dealing with him entirely. But then, something inside me paused. Because the way he kept asking, the way he kept checking, it wasn't just curiosity. It was eagerness. Almost desperation. Like my presence in that room bothered him more than anything else. And instead of making me want to leave, it did the opposite. Because suddenly, a very simple thought entered my mind. And once it did, I couldn't ignore it. Why should I be the one to leave, when I've done nothing wrong? Why should I be the one to walk away, just because someone else decided they don't like me? And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Leaving wouldn't just be an escape. It would be giving him exactly what he wanted. And I wasn't okay with that. Not anymore. That quiet frustration I had been holding in, that constant pressure I had been ignoring, it started to turn into something else. Something sharper. Something more controlled. Not anger, not exactly. More like resolve. Because in that moment, without saying it out loud, without making it obvious, I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere. And he had no idea what that meant yet. The next morning, I walked into that room differently. Nothing about my routine changed on the outside. I still wore the same uniform, carried the same posture, kept the same neutral expression. But internally, something had shifted in a way I couldn't undo even if I tried. I wasn't walking in as someone trying to survive the environment anymore. I was walking in as someone who had decided she wasn't going anywhere. And that subtle change? It affected everything. The way I observed him, the way I processed his behavior, even the way I responded, it all became calmer, more controlled, almost calculated. Because now I wasn't reacting to him, I was watching him. He didn't notice it at first. Why would he? In his mind, I was already halfway out the door. He had spent the last few days building up this expectation, this quiet excitement that soon, the problem, me, would disappear.
And I could see it in the way he carried himself.
He seemed lighter, more relaxed, like he had already won something that hadn't even happened yet. And that's what made what came next even more satisfying, because I knew something he didn't. Of course, it didn't take long before he brought it up again. It had become part of his routine at this point. Barely an hour into the day, he looked over at me, that same tone in his voice, casual on the surface but loaded underneath, and asked, "So, did you put in the request yet?" And for a split second, I just looked at him.
Not with anger. Not with annoyance. Just calm. And then I said it. Simple. Steady.
"Actually, I'm staying." I even smiled a little. Not a big smile, not exaggerated, just enough for him to see that I meant it. And I swear, the silence that followed felt louder than anything he had ever said to me. Because his reaction, he couldn't hide it.
Not this time.
The way his face dropped, the confusion flashing across his eyes, like his brain was trying to catch up to what I had just said. It was immediate. And then came that forced composure, that quick attempt to recover, like he didn't want anyone else to notice how much that answer bothered him. "Oh, okay," he muttered, but his tone was off. Completely off. And I didn't say anything else. I just turned back to my work like it was the most normal thing in the world. But from that moment on, the dynamic changed. Because now, every time he looked at me, there was something new there. Not just irritation anymore, but tension, confusion. And underneath it all, this growing frustration that he couldn't quite control. It was like he had mentally prepared himself for my absence, and now that I was still there, he didn't know how to adjust. And the best part, I didn't have to do anything dramatic to make it happen. Just staying was enough. But of course, he didn't stop. If anything, his behavior became more obvious. The comments came back, sharper this time, less subtle. He started picking at small things again, questioning my work, trying to create that same narrative he had been pushing from the beginning, that I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough, that I should leave. But now, it felt different. Because before, those comments used to get under my skin. I used to feel that tightness in my chest, that urge to defend myself. Now, they just felt predictable. And predictable behavior is easy to deal with. I started noticing patterns. The way he would only speak up when others were around, like he needed an audience. The way he exaggerated small mistakes but ignored everything I did right. The way his tone shifted depending on who was listening. It wasn't just random negativity, there was intention behind it. And once I saw that clearly, something inside me just detached. Because when you realize someone's behavior isn't about you, but about their own insecurities or biases, it loses power. So instead of reacting, I adapted. When he criticized me, I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I responded calmly, confidently, and just enough to make it clear I knew what I was doing. When he tried to undermine me in front of others, I didn't shut down. I stayed composed, sometimes even asked him to clarify what he meant, forcing him to either explain himself or backtrack. And that started to get to him. Because he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted anymore. See, people like him rely on something. They rely on you breaking, even a little. A reaction, a moment of frustration, something they can point to and say, "See? That's the problem." But I stopped giving him that. Completely. And without that reaction, his behavior started to look exactly like what it was. Unnecessary. Personal. Unjustified. And slowly, the group started noticing. Not in a dramatic way. No one called him out directly. But I could feel the shift. The small glances when he spoke. The slight pauses. The way conversations would move on quicker after he said something. It was subtle, but it was there. And I knew he felt it too. Because his tone started changing again, not calmer, not better, just more irritated. Like he was losing control of the narrative he had been trying to build. And the irony of it all? I didn't need to take revenge in the way people expect. I didn't need to embarrass him, argue with him, or prove him wrong loudly. All I had to do was stay. Stay consistent. Stay calm. Stay present in a space he clearly didn't want me in. And that alone was getting under his skin more than anything else could. But the real turning point? That came a few days later. Because there's only so long someone can keep pushing without getting something back. And when that moment finally came, it wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, but it hit exactly where it needed to. And for the first time since this all started, he wasn't the one in control anymore. By the time the next few days passed, something in that room had undeniably changed, and it wasn't loud or dramatic in the way people expect tension to explode.
It was quieter than that, more subtle, but somehow heavier.
The kind of shift you feel in the way conversations pause for half a second too long, or in the way people start noticing things they previously ignored.
And the center of that shift was him.
Because the more I stayed consistent, calm, and unaffected, the more his behavior started standing out in ways he couldn't control anymore. At first, it showed in small cracks. His patience got thinner. The comments he made lost that casual disguise and started sounding sharper, more forced. It was like he was trying harder to get the same reaction out of me, but every attempt just fell flat. And I could see it in his body language too, the way his jaw tightened when I didn't respond the way he expected, the way he'd hesitate for a split second after saying something, almost like he was waiting for me to react, and when I didn't, it threw him off balance.
That was the moment I realized something important.
This was never about me being bad at anything.
This was about control. And he was slowly losing it.
The group started picking up on it too, even if no one said it directly. See, when you're in such a closed environment, same people, same space, every day, you become hyper-aware of patterns.
And his pattern was becoming impossible to ignore.
The way he singled me out. The way his tone shifted specifically when addressing me. The way his criticism didn't match the reality of what was actually happening. People might not have confronted him, but they weren't blind.
And that silent awareness?
It changed the energy in the room more than any argument ever could. There was one moment in particular that I still think about, because that's when I knew things had officially turned. We were in the middle of a group task, nothing unusual, just the kind of work we did every day. Everyone had their roles, everyone focused. I was doing my part, double-checking everything like I always did, making sure there were no mistakes. And then, out of nowhere, he jumped in again.
Same tone. Same unnecessary edge.
He pointed out something I had done and said, "That's not right. You're messing it up again." The word again, he emphasized it like it was a pattern, like I was constantly making mistakes. And for a brief second, the room went quiet. Before, moments like that would have made me feel that familiar pressure, that instinct to defend myself, to explain, to prove I wasn't wrong.
But this time,
I didn't rush.
I didn't react emotionally.
I just looked at what I had done, paused, and then calmly said, "No, it's correct.
You're looking at the wrong part." My voice was steady, not defensive,
not aggressive,
just certain.
And that's when something interesting happened. Instead of pushing back immediately like he usually did, he hesitated.
It was small,
barely noticeable.
But it was there, because now, it wasn't just me and him in that moment. Everyone else was watching.
And when he looked again, actually looked this time, he realized I was right. You could see it in his expression, that split second where he knew he had misjudged the situation. But instead of acknowledging it, he tried to brush it off, mumbled something under his breath,
moved on quickly, like it didn't matter. But it did matter, because the room had already seen it.
That moment might sound simple, almost insignificant, but in an environment like that, moments like those carry weight. It wasn't just about being right. It was about breaking the image he had been trying to create of me. That narrative that I didn't know what I was doing, that I was a problem, that I didn't belong. It started cracking right there. And the more it cracked, the more uncomfortable he became. After that, his behavior didn't improve. If anything, it became more inconsistent. Some moments he'd go quiet, almost like he was trying to pull back. And then other moments, he'd overcompensate, throwing in unnecessary comments, trying to reassert that same dominance he had before.
But it didn't land the same way anymore. Because now, there was doubt. Not in me, but in him. And I could feel it.
Not just from him, but from the group. There's a certain kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The kind where people don't openly support you, but they also don't support the person going against you anymore. And that's exactly what started happening.
No one laughed at his comments. No one backed him up when he criticized me.
Conversations moved on quickly, like people didn't want to engage with that energy. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, he started losing the room.
And the thing is, I didn't change anything about what I was doing. I didn't suddenly try harder to prove myself. I didn't go out of my way to impress anyone. I just stayed consistent,
focused,
calm.
And that consistency, that quiet confidence, did more than any argument ever could.
But internally,
I won't lie, something was shifting in me too. At the beginning of all this, I just wanted peace. I wanted to get through the training without unnecessary stress, without feeling like I had to constantly defend my presence. Then it turned into something else, a need to stand my ground, to not let someone push me out for no reason.
But now it felt different.
Now it felt like I was watching someone unravel. And not because I was attacking them, not because I was doing anything to them directly, but because they couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't reacting the way they expected anymore. That their attempts to control the situation weren't working.
That the person they had decided didn't belong was still there. Still standing. Still doing her job without breaking.
And for someone like him, that's frustrating in a way that builds. Day by day. Moment by moment. Until eventually, it has to come out. And I could feel that moment getting closer.
Because people like him don't just stop. They don't quietly accept losing control. They push harder.
They look for one last opportunity to prove themselves right, to regain that sense of authority they feel slipping away.
And I knew it was coming. Not because I wanted it to,
but because I had seen enough of his behavior to understand one thing very clearly.
He wasn't done yet.
And when that moment finally happened, it wasn't going to be subtle. By this point, the tension in that room wasn't something you had to look for anymore, it was just there, sitting between us, woven into every interaction whether anyone acknowledged it or not.
And the thing about tension like that?
It doesn't just disappear. It builds. Quietly at first, then faster, sharper, until eventually, something has to give. And I could feel it coming, not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in those small, telling signs, the way his reactions became more impulsive, the way he stopped thinking before speaking, the way frustration started leaking into everything he did. He was running out of patience, and more importantly, he was running out of control.
That day started like any other.
Same routine, same environment, same unspoken awareness that something wasn't right between us. I went about my work the way I always did, focused, steady, not giving him anything to latch onto. And for a while, it stayed quiet. Almost too quiet. He didn't say much, didn't throw in his usual comments, didn't try to undermine me the way he had been doing.
And honestly, that silence felt heavier than his words ever did.
Because it didn't feel like he had let it go, it felt like he was waiting. And then it happened. We were all gathered around, working through a task that required input from multiple people. It wasn't complicated, but it needed coordination, attention to detail, and clear communication. Everyone was doing their part, speaking when necessary, keeping things moving. And I was in the middle of explaining something, nothing confrontational, just doing my role, when he suddenly cut in. Not interrupted, cut in. His voice came out sharper than usual, louder, carrying that edge that immediately shifts the energy in a room. "No, that's wrong," he said, not even looking at the full picture before speaking. And just like that, everything paused. Conversations stopped. Attention shifted. Because this wasn't one of his usual under-the-breath comments.
This was direct, public,
intentional. For a split second, I felt that old familiar sensation, the tightness in my chest, the instinct to react, to defend myself quickly before the narrative slipped again. But just as fast as it came, it faded. Because this time, I knew exactly what was happening.
This wasn't about the task.
This was his last attempt to reassert control, to prove, in front of everyone, that I didn't know what I was doing.
So I didn't rush.
I let the silence sit for just a moment. Then I looked at him, calm, steady, completely unbothered on the surface, and said, "It's not wrong. You're missing a step."
My tone didn't rise to match his.
It stayed even. Controlled.
Certain.
And that's when the shift happened. Because now, all eyes were on him. Not me. Him. He hesitated again, but this time it was longer. You could actually see the conflict in his expression. The moment where he realized he might have spoken too quickly, where he wasn't entirely sure anymore if he was right. But instead of stepping back, he pushed forward. Doubled down. "No, you're not doing it right," he said, more forceful now, like saying it louder would somehow make it true.
And that's when someone else spoke. Not me.
Not to defend myself.
Someone from the group.
"Wait, she's right."
It was simple. Casual, even. But the impact of those 3 words. Immediate. Because now it wasn't just me saying it. It wasn't just a back and forth between 2 people.
It was confirmation. External. Unbiased. And in that moment, everything he had been trying to build over the past week, the image, the narrative, the idea that I was the weak link, it all collapsed at once.
You could see it on his face. That realization.
That he had pushed too far, too publicly, and for the first time, he couldn't twist it, couldn't hide it, couldn't brush it off like it didn't matter.
Because it did matter. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard it.
And more importantly, everyone understood it.
He went quiet.
Not the controlled silence from earlier. This was different. This was the kind of silence that comes when someone doesn't know how to recover. His posture shifted slightly, his focus dropped, and for the rest of that moment, he didn't say anything.
No comeback. No correction. Nothing.
And I didn't say anything either.
Because I didn't need to.
That was the part that made it so satisfying, not in a loud, dramatic, I won kind of way, but in a quiet, undeniable shift of power. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to prove anything aggressively. I just stood there, stayed calm, and let the truth speak for itself. And from that moment on, he changed. Not completely. Not in a way that suddenly made everything perfect. But the difference was clear. The comments stopped. The unnecessary criticism disappeared. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. In fact, most of the time, he didn't look at me at all. It was like that one moment had taken something out of him, something he couldn't rebuild. Because what he lost wasn't just an argument. He lost credibility. And in an environment like that, once that's gone, it's hard to get back. The group dynamic shifted even more after that. It wasn't something anyone announced, but you could feel it. Conversations flowed differently. The tension eased, but in a way that left him slightly outside of it. Not excluded, just not leading anything anymore.
And me?
I didn't suddenly become the center of attention.
I didn't need to.
I just existed in that space the same way everyone else did, without being questioned, without being targeted. And that was all I wanted from the beginning. But what made it even more powerful was knowing how close I had been to walking away from it all. How easily I could have given him exactly what he wanted. And instead, by doing nothing more than staying calm, and staying consistent, I became the one thing he couldn't handle. And just like that, it was over. After that moment, things didn't magically become perfect, but they became quiet in a way that felt completely different from before. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence I had gotten used to during those first days, where every second felt like I was being watched, judged, evaluated. This silence was lighter, controlled, neutral. The kind of silence that finally lets you breathe without feeling like you have to prove something with every move you make. And the biggest difference? He was no longer at the center of my thoughts. For the first time since this all started, I didn't walk into that room thinking about him. I just walked in thinking about my work. And that shift, that internal shift, was more powerful than anything that had happened externally. Because at the beginning of this, he had control over my mental space. Every comment, every look, every unnecessary criticism, they stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. I would replay moments in my head, question myself, wonder if I was doing something wrong, even when deep down I knew I wasn't. That kind of pressure doesn't just disappear overnight. It lingers. It sits in the background, quietly affecting how you carry yourself. But now, that was gone. Not because he apologized. Not because he changed as a person. But because I stopped giving his behavior that level of importance. And that only happened because I stayed long enough to see the truth clearly, that his problem was never me. It was his perception, his bias, his need to feel in control of a space where he thought I didn't belong. And once that became obvious, his words lost weight. The days after that incident followed a new pattern. He kept his distance. No more unnecessary comments, no more public corrections, no more attempts to undermine me. If anything, he became quieter than everyone else. Not in a peaceful way, but in that restrained, slightly uncomfortable way of someone who knows they crossed a line and can't fully recover from it. And I didn't push it. I didn't try to get back at him, didn't try to embarrass him, didn't even acknowledge what had happened beyond that moment. Because I didn't need to. That's the part people don't always understand about revenge. Sometimes the most satisfying outcome isn't making someone feel what you felt. It's watching them realize, on their own, that they were wrong, without you having to say a word. And that's exactly what happened here. The group dynamic settled into something more balanced. Conversations became easier. Work flowed without unnecessary interruptions. And for the first time since joining that group, I felt like I was just another member of the team, not a target, not an outsider, not someone who had to constantly justify her presence. Just there. And that was enough. But every now and then, there would be these small moments, brief, almost unnoticeable, but meaningful in their own way. Like when he'd start to say something, then stop himself. Or when he'd glance in my direction, then quickly look away. Not out of anger, more like discomfort. And in those moments, I could tell, he remembered. Not just the situation, but the way it ended. The way things shifted without him being able to control it. And I won't lie, those moments were satisfying. Not in a cruel way. Not in a I want him to suffer kind of way. But in that quiet, validating way where you realize you didn't imagine any of it. You weren't overreacting. You weren't the problem. And more importantly, you didn't let someone else push you out of a space you had every right to be in. Because that's what this really came down to. It was never just about one person being rude or difficult. It was about what happens when someone decides you don't belong somewhere and expects you to accept that without question. It was about that silent pressure to remove yourself, to make things easier for them, even when you've done nothing wrong. And the moment you choose not to do that, everything changes. You see things more clearly. You carry yourself differently. And people notice. Looking back now, the most important part of this story isn't even his reaction, it's mine. Because I had two choices from the beginning. I could have left. Protected my peace. Avoided the conflict entirely. And honestly, that wouldn't have made me weak. Sometimes walking away is the right decision. But in this case, leaving would have meant agreeing with something that wasn't true. It would have meant accepting that I didn't belong there. And I knew that wasn't right. So I stayed. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just, firmly. And in doing that, I didn't just change how he saw me, I changed how I saw myself. Because there's something powerful about proving to yourself that you can handle uncomfortable situations without losing your composure. That you can stand your ground without becoming the kind of person you're dealing with. That you don't need to fight loudly to win. Sometimes, all it takes is consistency, patience, and the refusal to back down. And the funny thing is, this whole situation, the thing he hated the most about me in the beginning, ended up being the exact reason he lost in the end. Because I didn't leave. I stayed. And that was enough. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Not every battle needs noise. Not every win needs an audience. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply exist in a space someone tried to push you out of and refuse to move. If this story hit you in any way, if you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you or tried to make you feel like you didn't belong, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have stayed or walked away? And trust me, there are a lot more stories like this coming.